Hi, everybody. Welcome to 1.7 Jazz. We're going to talk about the genre of ragtime and then another genre that evolved out of it called stride. Ragtime kind of emerges in the 1890s, right around in 1895, 1900, in urban cities like St. Louis, Memphis, New York City. And these are usually places with some piano bars and nightclubs and sometimes even brothels, actually, these places where people would go to pay prostitutes. And these piano players would play entertainment music. So sometimes it was just kind of background music, but also it was also dancing music. So there's really no like subject matter, and the titles kind of just tell you about cities and dance clubs and dances and things like that. So first, obviously, the historical context, then we're going to talk about the audio, the musicians to know, songs to know, and then we'll do the song analysis guide. So historical context of ragtime and stride is these are really coming out of urban Black communities. 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, there were Black Americans moving out of the South after the Civil War, and there was also that population of free Black people during and before the Civil War who were living in urban areas. So this kind of predates the Great Migration. We'll talk about that later, of millions of Black Americans moving out of the South. But during this time, right, these Black people were living totally segregated in many cases from white society. And they had communities that were almost self-contained with restaurants and bars and nightclub life that would feature live music. A good example would be this guy right below me. That's Tom Turpin. He ran the Rosebud Bar. He was a St. Louis guy, and he was pretty well known. He ran several different bars in what today is called Mill Creek Valley, which is about where St. Louis University is. This kind of club music was called ragtime by about 1900. And along with vaudeville blues, it evolves into jazz music in around 1910, 1915 in New Orleans. We'll get to that one later. By the 1920s, ragtime specifically also evolves into another piano style called stride jazz piano, and it's more loose, and we'll kind of hear some examples of that. So the musicians are primarily young adult Black men who are living in these cities, right? St. Louis, Kansas City, Louisville. A lot of times they're close to the South, but they're not in the deep South. Obviously, New Orleans is maybe an exception to that, and there were some clubs and bars in Atlanta where this music was played as well. Usually the audiences are lower class and maybe middle class Black people in bars, nightclubs, restaurants. And the dancing that they did with this music emerged from something called the cakewalk. It was a traditional kind of African-American dance that was popular well before the Civil War, and it still exists even today. The cakewalk actually became part of minstrel shows for a little while there as well. Middle-class whites started leaning in and listening to ragtime right around maybe 1910, and Tin Pan Alley composers also started pulling it into their songs as well. So things like Alexander's Ragtime Band, right, by Irving Berlin, was, sort of a ragtime song, but it wasn't that classic ragtime sound. One thing to know is that white people also started kind of doing these dance shows. So this is a partner, Irene and Vernon Castle, and they did these like dance shows where basically you'd have tons of people come and pay, and they would watch them do these really elaborate dances, sometimes even to this ragtime music. Almost every ragtime song is instrumental, so there aren't words. They don't usually have a specified subject matter except for maybe in the titles. Now, this is, I think, a lovely, awesome clip from this book, The Broken Heart of America. And I can't say enough good things about this book. I read it over the summer of 2020. And he's talking about St. Louis here. And he says, the bar rooms and bordellos in Deep Morgan, which is Del Mar in downtown St. Louis, and along Chestnut Valley, which is where St. Louis University is today, all employed piano players, virtually all of them Black men, to entertain their guests. And out of the crucible of imperial license, sexual longing, and an artistic genius, in the brothels of St. Louis came one of the definitive art forms of the 20th century, ragtime. And then you can go on and obviously read the rest. It talks a lot about Scott Joplin, who is one of the most famous ragtime composers and players of them all. So here's some pictures of these. This is actually Scott Joplin's house over there in the top left. That's where he lived when he wrote some of his most famous ragtime songs. On the right is a building that's kind of a recreation of the Rosebud Bar, the exterior of it. There's the advertisement we saw earlier, and then there's that picture in the bottom left is kind of the recreated interior, and you can go visit those today. So what do the audio sound like in these ragtime? Well, most of the time we don't have actually a lot of recordings of ragtime as it was played in 1900. What we do have are actually piano rolls. So that's what you see below. On the left are boxes, and inside the boxes, this rolled up piece of paper, and you can see it in the middle one. You would attach it to a piano, and the piano would play the music for you. So we do have tons of recordings of these kind of punched out little holes, and it will play the song for you. And it's actually from the original composers, but it's not like a record, right? So it's a little different. In terms of the instruments and vocals, right, they're solo piano for the most part. Later on, we start to get some where there's some musical ensembles. There's a guy named James Reese Europe, who's a really well-known composer of those kinds of ragtime songs for dance shows, like for the Castles, right? Irene and Vernon Castle. So Europe worked with the Castles, and he wrote tons of music for them. The timbre is jaunty, it's bright, it's expressive, right? It's like pounding away at a keyboard. The tempo is fast. It's for dancing and listening and background music, right? Think of these kind of wild nightclubs and bars. The pitch is interesting. The left hand on the piano is going to be playing chords in pretty much standard 4/4 time. So it's going to be kind of a pretty regular sound. Then the right hand is going to play what are called syncopated melodies. And in the next slide, I have an example here that is from a totally different class, but I'll link it here above me to what is syncopation. And syncopation in words is the technique of playing in which the notes are played kind of on the upbeat, a little ahead of where you actually expect the note to be played. So there's kind of an anticipation sound to it. So it creates a little bit of excitement in the music. And that video does a really good job of distinguishing what that sounds like. In terms of the musicians, right, I've already told you it's mostly young adult black men. And there are 5 young adult black men that are all like these famous, incredibly famous stride and ragtime composers. Tom Turpin is one of the older guys. He's this guy here. We saw him earlier. Scott Joplin is the king of ragtime, right? He's so well known, and he's just a completely, perhaps the most influential composer of all of jazz music, right? He's so important to all of this. It's hard to overstate him. James Reese Europe, that's him in his military uniform because he actually was in World War I, and he created a band with the Harlem Hellfighters, and his band toured all over Europe. His name is Europe as well. So, but then after the war and before the war, he also toured with the Castle couple, and he wrote songs for them as well. Tragically, he died young. He was stabbed actually right after a concert. James P. Johnson, that's this guy over here. Obviously, another great piano player. There's some great songs by him in the playlist. This guy here is Fats Waller. I don't have a picture of Art Tatum. Fats Waller and Art Tatum were both stride piano players. You can see that they're a little younger, right? You know, they're born a little bit after ragtime, and they have this more loose piano style that you'll hear if you check out these 3 songs. So the Harlem Rag is an early ragtime song. You get the real feel for that like dance vibe to it. It's written by Tom Turpin. He was a piano player in his day. We don't have any recordings of him playing though. So the recordings that I have in the playlist are of people playing them now. The Entertainer is one of the most famous, if not the most famous ragtime of them all, right? So the most famous rag of them all. So hopefully you get a chance to listen to that one. Viper's Drag is a classic stride piano song, and you'll get that feeling of like how loose it is, a little bit more than that structured feeling that you'll sometimes hear in ragtime. Ragtime can sometimes be almost mechanical because of how it's structured, but stride piano opens up a little bit more. So check that one out, and you can see that one's a much later song, right? 1934. Song analysis guide. So if you were here with me in class, we'd check that out. I hope this has helped you. There's some sources here at the end of the slideshow. I'll see you next time.